Hello, dear friends. Today is the 25th of March, 2023 year. Today is a holiday that many people in Belarus are responsible for, Freedom Day, which was celebrated for many years, in the 90s, but now we see that this holiday in Belarus is again banned. Today, this day is overshadowed by the messages that have been received and are being received, appearing on news feeds. The Kremlin has decided to deploy nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. This is a huge tragedy. It is a huge challenge for not only Belarus, Belarusians and Europe in general, the international community. Because, firstly, in this way Russia cancels all its international obligations, which it assumed in the 94th year by signing the Budapest Memorandum together with other parties to this agreement, Great Britain and the United States of America, that all nuclear weapons will be withdrawn from the territory of Belarus. Now we see that Putin is raising the stakes in his geopolitical game, which he is playing. We see that it is suffering a crushing defeat in Ukraine. His war, which he unleashed, trying to hang himself the crown of some under-emperor, led to a huge tragedy against the Ukrainian people. And now we see that the already internationally recognized criminal Vladimir Putin is trying to introduce nuclear weapons into Belarus allegedly at the request of the Nazi criminal Alexander Lukashenko. I very much hope that in the very near future the Nazi criminal Alexander Lukashenko will receive the relevant documents from international jurisdictions, from international courts, and this person will be summoned to the International Criminal Court in Gaga and in general to other courts that are only possible, just like Putin. We are actively working on this. I very much hope that these two people who unleashed the war against Ukraine will still be held accountable during their lifetime, and the International Tribunal, which will certainly investigate the crimes of the people who unleashed this terrible war against Ukraine. Now we see that the Kremlin wants to introduce nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. This means that the entire territory of Belarus will be under the strike zone in the event of such attacks that may be undertaken. I assume that Putin is raising the stakes in the game. I think that Putin will now threaten Great Britain, Germany, Poland, France and other European countries with nuclear weapons from the territory of Belarus. I think that the madness of those Kremlin lunatics who are in power today, and it is obvious that they have completely gone off the roof, there are no brakes there. I think their madness will only increase. And I assume that if they suddenly decide to launch a nuclear strike, it will be carried out from the territory of Belarus on neighboring states, on the territory of the European Union. There is such a risk, and it is obvious that the entire territory of Belarus, especially the places from where these missiles will fly, will be in the strike zone. But I think that the Kremlin elders understand that retaliatory strikes will arrive not only on the territory of Belarus. Retaliatory strikes will arrive in St. Petersburg, Moscow, Sochi, Rostov, the Far East, Vladivostok and other cities of Russia. I think that no bunker, no matter how multi-layered it is, will save these crazy people from the war they have unleashed and the war they want to unleash, a nuclear war. In this situation, I assume that the whole world, which is somehow following these events, should take steps, decisive actions to, at least, not only condemn this madness that they are creating, but also obviously, it is obvious that this is necessary in order to take more decisive action, decisive steps to stop these madmen. Therefore, friends, those who watch the broadcast, do not forget to put likes, write questions. And I would like to note here that in my opinion today a decisive role is played in opposing this fight, this challenge that Putin is throwing to the West together with his mutt Lukashenko. I think the Western world is making insufficient efforts. It seems to me that today Belarus is not only in the affected zone, but also in the risk zone for the entire security of the European continent. And the European Union today has a tool, a very important and powerful tool that has not been used. This instrument is called an ultimatum, which can lead, first, to the release of all political prisoners in Belarus, without exception, to the cessation of terror. The second is a tool called an ultimatum. It may lead to the withdrawal from the territory of Belarus of absolutely all the weapons that Russia has sent there since the 21st year, all Russian troops, and the prevention of the introduction of nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. This ultimatum should presuppose, in case of refusal to take such steps, the complete closure of the entire railway freight traffic that connects Belarus with the European Union. Lukashenko and Putin and their friend Xi Jinping, who recently flew to Moscow, and Lukashenko flew to him. They use this road, the railway, in order to deliver their goods to Europeans and receive contraband either in one direction or in the other. They earn money from this, they earn money from trading. And European politicians who like to have long phone conversations with Vladimir Putin. At the same time, they do not notice the repressions that are going on in Belarus, because politicians and political prisoners in Belarus are in prisons, they are not visible on the streets. But we remember with you that in August, September and autumn of the 20th year, millions of Belarusians across the country took to the streets and demanded that the fascist criminal Alexander Lukashenko release all political prisoners. The whole of Europe has seen it, European politicians have seen it, who today close their eyes and limit themselves only to statements on Twitter, their excitements and exclamations. This is an absolutely incompetent policy of the European Union, which, in my opinion, should be tougher and more decisive. Europe today has a unique tool that will allow it to issue a collective ultimatum to Lukashenko and demand that he release all political hostages within a few days, withdraw Russian troops from the territory of Belarus. And Europe has this tool. And if some politicians try to pretend that this is not there, it means that they are trading with Lukashenko, which means that they are participants in the very crimes that are happening today on the territory of Belarus, on the territory of Ukraine. Therefore, I am absolutely convinced that the voice of every person who understands this in one way or another should be heard not only inside Belarus, but also outside the country, in the international arena, and to demand that European politicians make these decisions if they do not want these missiles, which Putin is currently delivering, not to fly to Berlin, Paris, London and other cities later. Before it's too late, the fascist criminal Lukashenko can be stopped. And I am absolutely convinced that as soon as the regime changes in Belarus, then no nuclear missiles will appear in Belarus. Moreover, we have debated and discussed many times that if the fascist criminal Lukashenko had not been sitting in his chair with Putin's support in the 20th year, then I am absolutely convinced that no entry of troops into the territory of Ukraine from the territory of Belarus would have happened. Putin uses his mutt Lukashenko as a person who owes him now. And together, in this tandem, they will make any other efforts to make attacks, maybe not only on Ukraine, but they will also try to threaten Europe with war. We are on the verge of a great Third World War. She is like me last year, when the war in Ukraine just started, I said that we are standing in the first minutes of the Third World War. We are approaching. These are even seconds away from the start of a full-scale Third World War. It will probably be nuclear. But there is still a chance for the world, for the civilized world, to stop these criminals who are trying to unleash this Third World War, who are experiencing the complex of a destroyed empire. They want to restore the empire. They want to restore the empire by force. They want to restore the concentration camps. Today is the 25th of March, a tragic day for the peoples of the Baltic republics, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. In the 49th year, a special operation was carried out by the Soviet NKVD to evict about 100,000 people from these republics to Siberia and Kazakhstan for eternal settlement. Many have never returned to their native lands, they were forcibly resettled. In Soviet reality, the history of the tragedy of entire peoples who were forcibly resettled was hushed up. Not only were there Baltic examples, there were the republics of the Caucasus, residents of the Caucasian republics, who were also forcibly evicted. And Putin will pursue the same policy, the policy of forcibly strengthening residents from Ukraine and an attempt to populate them with residents of other regions of Russia in order to somehow integrate them. Because it is obvious that none of those who live on the territory of Ukraine today supports the war that Putin unleashed. No one asked to withdraw troops on the territory of Ukraine. No one asked to be protected from anyone. It was the territory of a sovereign state, which has the right to decide its own policy, discuss some internal disputes, contradictions that exist, but it is their right to resolve their issues. They did not ask to send troops and did not ask to bomb peaceful Ukrainian cities. And today the Belarusian people are not asking Vladimir Putin to introduce nuclear missiles on the territory of Belarus. And today we see that this man, on behalf of the Belarusian people, on behalf of the impostor Lukashenko, decides that nuclear missiles should enter Belarus. We did not give Belarus such a right to Putin to introduce nuclear missiles on the territory of Belarus. I believe that for these crimes, those people who make such decisions today, they will be responsible to history first of all. And it is obvious that history is not on their side, because it is impossible to solve wars with a nuclear conflict, it is impossible to solve some issues. This does not give any greatness, it only gives indicators of such, gopnichestvo, when a man with a baton tries to threaten neighbors, residents of neighboring houses, neighboring streets. This is an absolute history of street gangsterism of the early 90s, and maybe even earlier. This is not the language of civilized conversation, and therefore I believe that European countries should stop talking in the language of diplomacy with dictator Alexander Lukashenko. He does not understand the language of this diplomatic negotiation process. He understands only the hard language, the language of a baton, and this is what Alexander Lukashenko understands. And it is necessary to talk to him exactly in this language. It excites him. He is excited by the language of such power, brutality. So let's talk to him in this language. Give him 48 hours, tell him, you won't let Lukashenko go, that's it, the border has been closed. And let him sort it out with Putin, with the Chinese leader, about the fact that hundreds of railway trains loaded with all sorts of goods that will go from China and to Europe, will get stuck. They will stand not only on the territory of Belarus, they are also becoming on Russian territory. This will paralyze the entire railway line. And what do you think Alexander Lukashenko's decision will be after that? He will kneel down and ask the Europeans to open the railway crossing. I am absolutely convinced of this. But the Europeans do not have enough political will to do this, because they believe that it is enough to limit ourselves to tweeting that we are excited, we are expressing concern there. That's what they limit themselves to. Write letters to political prisoners. How will this help political prisoners write letters? How old is it? Writing letters to political prisoners for 10 years? This, I think, is absolutely the wrong model that the European Union has chosen. Therefore, we have made a request to all the leaders of the European Union. Letters have been sent to all the presidents, the Prime Minister, the ministers of foreign affairs of the European Union of all countries without exception. Letters have been sent to the UK, the USA, Norway, and several more countries will now be connected. We ask the countries of the European Union to submit to the next summit of the European Union, which will be held in April, the issue of the release of political prisoners in Belarus, the issuance of a collective ultimatum by Alexander Lukashenko. And we ask everyone who somehow believes that this is the only possible way, and I believe that today this is the only way. I do not see any other real steps that could lead to the release of prisoners. Demand the release of prisoners from Alexander Lukashenko and issue him a collective ultimatum in this regard. I emphasize that it is impossible to talk to Lukashenko in the language of this CC Lyle of some telephone conversation. Merkel tried to call him there in the 20th year, Macron called him. It doesn't work. Lukashenko perceives this as a weakness of European countries. He laughs at it. Putin laughs at this when Macron called him himself before the start of the war in Ukraine. I don't know what they were talking about, but it doesn't work with these people, they don't understand this language. As we can see, they understand only the language of power. Here they are nuclear weapons, and what about Europe? Will he express his concern once again? Close the transit. After all, what are you waiting for? Do you expect him to bomb further European cities? Are you waiting for this? Well, wait. We waited until Ukraine was attacked. I think this is an absolutely incompetent policy of European states. It is extremely weak, it is a policy. Yes, of course, it's cool, Europeans, thank you, you help Belarusians, you issue humanitarian visas instead of their. Well, in fact, this is salvation in some part, but this is not a solution to the issue. You are already solving this issue after the fact. You solve the question. You know, when a person's blood gushes from his leg, you try to tie it with a bandage, but you need to perform a surgical operation. It is necessary to carry out an operation to dismantle the criminal. Lukashenko falls under the entire category of a terrorist organization, under all categories of an international terrorist. There is the Geneva Declaration, which was adopted in the 89th year. Why is it not used? According to official data, only 1,500 political prisoners are in prison today. Yes, they are not prisoners, they are hostages. A bandit with a gun in his hands has taken hostages, is now trying to blackmail Europe. And what do we see? And the Europeans say, and we are excited, we are outraged, we demand and demand. How much will you demand? Therefore, only tough measures, only a tough dialogue with the Nazi criminal. There can be no conversations with this scoundrel. We see a separate country, Portugal, some others. Lukashenko is trying to bargain at all, they don't want to lift sanctions, you see. Well, Portugal experienced terror itself during Salazar's time. And then the Portuguese leader, including the head of the United Nations, who himself comes from Portugal, is bargaining, Vitya. He is worried about hunger in Africa. And he is not concerned about the fate of political prisoners. I have not heard a single statement from the current Secretary General John about political prisoners in Belarus. Well, maybe he got confused somewhere quietly and that's it. And Africa worries him more. Maybe there are some other reasons why Africa is bothering. Therefore, it is impossible to be like those people who say that something can be agreed with Lukashenko. You can't negotiate with him about anything. I talked about this many times in the 21st year. This is a liar, a criminal, a maniac, a terrorist. You can only talk to him like a terrorist. What kind of picture does you have in your mind, or does it appear before your eyes at all? Here you get the news in the morning. Some kind of plane has been hijacked, a ship has been hijacked. What will follow in a couple of hours? And the following will follow. An international hostage rescue operation will be announced. And what do we see in Belarus? Lukashenko has taken hostages. Well, 1,500 according to official data, according to unofficial, about 5,000 political hostages. What kind of operation? There is nothing. Trade is going on, everything is increasing, nothing is happening. So in this situation, I think that we need to influence this situation, we need to raise our voice and try to knock on the doors of European politicians in this way. If they don't hear, it means finding other tools to be heard. In this situation, I want to note that here we are, as I noted to you already at the beginning of February, where with Valery Tsekalo in the United States of America, we also discussed the issue of the release of political prisoners there. And we proposed to the United States of America and wrote an official letter addressed to the President of the United States, to the Congress, to the name, then added more to Blinken and sent letters to the head of national security with a request to support the collective ultimatum of European countries and to put it to Alexander Lukashenko to demand the release of political prisoners. Otherwise apply more drastic harsh measures against him personally. We asked, in fact we found some support there. This proposal is supported by the United States of America, I will say so, but it was at non-public meetings. And I hope that we will still be in our discussions and negotiations that we are currently conducting with a number of European countries. We have already held 2 briefings for European ambassadors. In total, about 20 countries participated there and we have individual conversations with some of them. And I see that this is being understood in a number of countries, but still there is still a lack of political will. I still hope that reason will prevail and the countries will understand that there is a humanitarian crisis that needs to be addressed. I would also like to note that the appeal that we also sent to the White House has been partially heard. At least 2 of the 9 points that have been proposed already, I see they have been implemented. One of the items, Lukashenko's plane, was included in the sanctions list. True, we asked for 2 planes, but for some reason they have made 1 so far, but we will try to adjust it so that the second plane, on the one that Lukashenko flies, where the golden toilet is installed, also gets on the sanctions list. This will close the possibility of servicing this aircraft in international centers where they were serviced in Germany, and accordingly, the plane will not be able to take off after some time, because it will be dangerous to fly on such an aircraft. This is one time. Secondly, Boeing, which was included in the sanctions list, will not be able to receive a number of major airports around the world. Well, it is possible that Lukashenko will be able to fly before Russia, but then he will have to repair the plane on his own. Somewhere near Minsk, he will open some kind of aircraft repair shop. Therefore, this is the first point that we asked for, and the second we talked to a lot of people and asked them to hold a broad discussion in the United States on the situation in Belarus, and we heard that the other day a representative of the U.S. State Department said that a broad discussion with the participation of a broad coalition would take place in Washington by the end of the year. The democratic forces of Belarus public opinion leaders, journalists, experts in order to discuss the situation that is developing, what measures the United States can take to resolve the political crisis in Belarus, to at least save Belarus from what is happening today. I assume, that in the near future we will still prepare another letter to the United States in order, in connection with Putin's decision to introduce nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus, to convene an international summit with the participation of the leaders of the countries that gave guarantees to Belarus not to introduce, not to find nuclear weapons on the territory of the country, including the UK, USA, France. We will demand that all these countries take part directly in the convening of an immediate summit, because the situation is critical and it is necessary not to wait and not be limited to a message on Twitter "I am outraged" there, well, be outraged further, but this does not solve the situation in any way. So also according to the information that came from Washington recently, a congressional hearing is planned in the fall in September. At least I was informed that this event will be scheduled and the opinions of various political actors in Belarus will be heard on the situation that is developing, what measures the United States can take to resolve the crisis in Belarus. In order, including political prisoners, to get out of their prisons. But I am absolutely convinced, I believe that now there are enough tools to achieve the release of all political hostages without exception in a short time. To do this, there must be only the political will of European countries, and it is important that everyone who considers this a reasonable idea supports it regardless of their views, regardless of any of their moods. If someone doesn't support it, Latushka supports, let him say supports, does not support, let him say does not support. We will pass. Does Pal Palik support this idea? No. Tikhanovskaya, here she was in the States. She asks, Svetlana Georgievna, what measures can the United States take to release prisoners? What's the answer? Write letters to political prisoners, give money to the fund. Here is the support of a person, such a position. Well, we heard it. Who's next? Let's then also identify and understand who takes what position in this situation. I believe that there is no division based on any political preferences. This is a question of liberating people. If someone has another tool to solve this issue, let them voice it. I believe that if there is an ultimatum tool that can work, and the examples show recently that it worked. For example, in Nicaragua, when 222 political prisoners were released, it was after the pressure that was exerted by the United States against the leader of this country. This led to the fact that all political prisoners who were in Nicaragua were evacuated. The same story arose in March of the 23rd year. More recently, 22,000 political prisoners, protesters in Iran were released and amnestied. This happened, among other things, under pressure and most likely internal forces, but it is also possible that some external factors influenced it. There was also a story of the release and amnesty of all the participants of the protests that took place in January of the 22nd year in Kazakhstan. They, well, as far as I know, they are all amnestied. Therefore, we need to make efforts to ensure that international pressure has a serious impact on those people who receive money during trade. We do not ask Western politicians and leaders to supply weapons to Belarus, but if they can give such weapons, but they cannot give it, it is obvious. Therefore, we ask them to take other steps to ensure that the situation in Belarus does not get out of control. It has every reason to get out of control, and then the war will not only spread to the territory of Ukraine, it will also climb into Belarus, and into other countries. Because while European politicians will continue to talk to Lukashenko, they will trade with him, they will circumvent the sanctions that have been imposed, and everyone knows this. A train loaded with cigarettes or some other goods cannot go and come to some country and then no one notices it and everyone closes their eyes. And then, when the journalists reveal this, they start to stomp and pull, we didn't notice. But this does not happen. You can hold a pack of cigarettes in your bag and you will be searched at the airport, sniffed, it will be taken out. And how do you carry a whole car? A whole train is traveling with contraband and European countries do not see this. Of course, everyone sees it, but we are not fools, of course, everyone sees it, understands, trade is going on and Lukashenko earns from it. His businessmen, some of them, or even his diplomats, are also doing fine. I think it is immoral when European countries, turning a blind eye to the repressions that are going on in Belarus, are engaged in trade. It would be moral, in your opinion, to trade with the Nazi criminal Hitler during the Second World War, and some traded and the Soviet Union traded, although Denmark or some other countries used gaskets there for trade. That is, there was always trade anyway, but let's try to use this toolkit now. I think it would be very reasonable and right to stop the dictator. In this situation, as I noted, we have sent letters to all the leaders of European countries and are consulting with them. We have also launched a petition that has been signed by several famous people from different countries there. We asked them to sign, but the question there is not about the number of people who will sign the petition. We don't need to show how many support this petition. This was shown by the people of Belarus. This people of Belarus showed in the summer of the 20th year, when about 1 million people, and maybe even more across the country, millions of Belarusians took to the streets and demanded that Alexander Lukashenko release political prisoners. Point number 1. Point number 2 was to hold new fair and fair elections. None of this has been accomplished. Therefore, we do not need any signatures. We have a signature from the Belarusian people, who took to the streets and demanded that Lukashenko release political prisoners, stop repressions in the country. And I think that now European countries, even if it's been almost 3 years there, but European countries should remember what happened and those promises that were not made to support the democratic movement of Belarus. They should fulfill them, I think. If European countries promise to allocate $3 billion there after the overthrow of Lukashenko for democracy, well, but we don't need $3 billion after Lukashenko is gone. Let's spend these $3 billion. If we really promised about them, we will spend it to ensure that he leaves. If someone says that he will suffer losses, for example, some kind of organization in Poland or Germany from the overlap of possible borders or any risks that have arisen with this, even with the ultimatum process. Well, let's use this firm to chip off a piece of these $3 billion, compensate. What's the problem? Let's start this discussion, then if someone has losses, we will discuss it. But I think that in this situation we need to act more decisively, and not wait for some miracle. Therefore, if you have any ideas and suggestions, write to me in person, write to the mail, and it would be good, of course, if those who listen, including from representatives of diasporas of different Belarusian countries, it would be nice if you also tried in your circles, in the media of your countries, communicating with different politicians of their countries, to raise this issue about the need to at least bring the issue of political prisoners to the next summit of the European Union and at least persuade European countries so that they begin to support in the public space the need for citizen Lukashenko to issue a collective ultimatum. We must take all measures to achieve the release of all political hostages without exception. Not 1, not 3, not 10. Absolutely everyone. And today there is a tool in the hands of the European Union for this. There are demands and desires and a request from the Belarusian people to European countries to take these efforts, these steps. And therefore, let's work together. Everyone in their own area will be able to somehow get through to those doors, to those offices that can make it possible to succeed. I am absolutely convinced that this is possible. And we should say not only that this is a prisoner, we should say that this is a humanitarian catastrophe in the country, when people are forced to sit in prisons today because they defended their rights, freedoms, democracy. And we should declare this loudly. We should not be afraid to talk about it. We see, of course, a huge tragedy that is happening in Ukraine, when people are being killed, houses are being blown up with rockets, these houses are being bombed, peaceful cities are being bombed, entire settlements, villages, hospitals are being destroyed, their infrastructure is being destroyed. The whole world sees this, it's understandable, but the same torture takes place in Belarus. In the same inhuman conditions, Lukashenko kills people in prisons. Yes, This is also a tragedy, of course, but it is not visible today, so the world does not talk about it. Against the background of the war in Ukraine, well, it seems to someone that the situation in Belarus is not so sad. Of course, it may be even sadder later, as I said, if Lukashenko continues to make efforts and wind up these repressions and unleash a new big war in Europe together with Putin. Our task is to do everything possible to prevent a major catastrophe in Europe, to prevent the outbreak of a full-scale war, and even a nuclear war, because then Belarus will be wiped off the face of the earth. Belarusian cities will cease to exist, they will simply not exist, they will be destroyed, they will simply be wiped off the face of the earth with all these warheads. There will be what happened in Mariupol, there will be what was happening now in Bucha and in other cities. And friends, while you are sitting and thinking that somewhere someone will decide something for you, no one will decide anything for you. If the Europeans limit themselves to tweeting messages, we are outraged, so we will give you 3 billion there when Lukashenko is gone. Yes, we do not need this money for 3 billion when he is gone. Now let's get them. Let's take 3 billion now, spend it, I don't know, hire some gang that will arrest the Nazi criminal Lukashenko, and take some more effective measures. But Belarusians don't need 3 billion in some uncertain future there. What will you need to do with them? We will find resources for the development of the country, therefore, resources are needed now in order to stop the Nazi criminal, so as not to spend money on absolutely empty companies that are being spent there. We see in the last year and a half 100 million euros Europeans have allocated in Belarus. We were in Europe, we asked these questions. I honestly did not get an answer to this question. Much more than 100 million euros went from the European Union. Well, they spend on themselves, let them honestly admit it. We spent money, transferred it from one pocket to another. But I don't see that it went to a real fight with Lukashenko, it went to an imitation of the fight with Lukashenko. This did not affect the regime with Lukashenko in any way. Therefore, if the Europeans want to change something, then they need to be honest, they need changes in Belarus or not. If not, well, then it's necessary to say that they are satisfied with Lukashenko, the trade is going on, that he is sitting there some kind of Lukashenko, why does he need any changes? But if they are afraid of these changes in Belarus, they should also openly say so. But imitating the fight against the Lukashenko regime is, I think, the moral today for European countries. And we will also raise this issue, as it were, but I believe that today this position should be not only mine, but someone else's. The position should be those who can openly talk about it and are not afraid to talk about it and are not afraid to raise this topic. Therefore, friends, thank you for the fact that you still sometimes send a useful message to the chatbot and are not afraid to do it too. And I would like to ask you to be careful about some things sometimes, especially if you are inside Belarus. Lukashenko, I assume, in the near future may carry out and commit a terrorist attack on the territory of Belarus. We can already see that he is trying to wind up the public, trying to present some fake stories with an airplane in Machalishi. A dead man was found in a morgue in Grodno and showed that some kind of terrorist attack was allegedly committed. And I assume that Lukashenko will still go to commit a large-scale terrorist attack on the territory of Belarus. I have talked about this many times, repeatedly. This man will stop at nothing. I do not rule out that Putin will help him arrange this terrorist attack on the territory of Belarus in order to blame it all on Ukraine, on the opposition, on anyone. They will find some kind of BCHB flag there, they will find a business card of the right sector there, they will find some other attributes there, sharpeners, stakes and everything else. But it will be completely clear who is behind the organization of such a terrorist attack, because only one person in Belarus is interested in such a terrorist attack, Alexander Lukashenko and his entourage. Therefore, we will insist now in the near future that, after all, after the decision to issue the order to Vladimir Putin to the Hague Tribunal, I think that now the chances have increased that Lukashenko will also receive such a warrant, and we will still also now and are conducting such negotiations, consultations with lawyers and with some foreign jurisdictions to ensure that the cases that were transferred earlier were still directed to the entrance, and against citizen Lukashenko was initiated a criminal case and he received a warrant for an invitation like this can be said to the Hague.
приглашение такое, вот можно сказать, в Гаагу.
He's never been there in The Hague. I think they will like this city very much, and I am absolutely convinced that his place is still where he deserves it, a place at least in the dock.
Где он его заслужил, место, как минимум, на скамье подсудимых.
I very much hope that Alexander Lukashenko will live to see the day when he will have to answer for all the crimes he committed against the Belarusian people, against the people of Ukraine, against freedom, against people, against individuals, for destroying and continuing to destroy the Belarusian statehood, for continuing to press the Belarusian people, for the repression, for the tears of mothers, for the murder of peaceful people. I am sure that not only he will answer, his family will answer. The whole family of Alexander Lukashenko will be equally responsible for the crime of his grandfather, father, great-grandfather, because their family will be branded for what this Nazi criminal is doing in Belarus today. Therefore, I am absolutely convinced that this family will be cursed in Belarus for many, many decades and centuries. Maybe they will even change their surnames, because, well, obviously with the surname of Lukashenko in Belarus after his overthrow, you will not go far. Therefore, I expect that this person will still see during his lifetime how what he does will be punished. Evil will be punished and good will surely win. Thanks to everyone who was in this short stream of mine today. I congratulate everyone once again on the 25th of March. I believe that someday this holiday will certainly be important for the consolidation of the country, the nation, and not only those who speak and think in Russian, but also for those who dilute on the Belarusian move. It will be holy so Freedom Day. This will be a Freedom Day for Skin and Belarusians.